with the rise in the data-driven economy, data has become more and more important than ever before. So whether we're talking about AI-driven processes, where things are kicking off automatically based on machine learning and inputs, whether we're talking about humans making decisions based on available data, whether that's where to drill their oil rig, where to drill for oil, or where they should go take their business next, and so forth. The rise of multi-sided data marketplaces, so the idea that I have data that might be valuable to other people and I want to be able to selectively exchange that data with other parties. Supply chains that more and more are involving parties that don't necessarily trust each other and don't necessarily trust each other's data. Multi-party collaborative environments, as well as the rise of things like transactive energy, where you actually have consumers selling power directly to organizations like PG&E and so forth, and then PG&E selling power back to those consumers. These all really rely on data, and it has to be data that's obviously accurate, because if your data isn't accurate, then you're making all the wrong decisions. Your machines are doing all the wrong things. You're drilling in all the wrong places, and so forth. This is why data integrity is becoming a top concern about every vertical. And data integrity comes in a couple of different flavors. One is somebody hacks into your database or whatever, usually an inside job, and comes in and doesn't just steal your data, but actually changes that data. So this can be everything from modern day Ferris Bueller's changing grades in schools' computers. Yes, this still happens. It can also be folks that are stealing data, like the Russian hackers fairly recently. And there was also a case a few years ago with doping documents being altered, where they steal the data to produce it publicly, but before they produce it publicly, they also change that data so that they can show maybe that somebody is doping that had a medical condition that it was allowed for, but they take the medical condition out of the records, or they change some names or dates in a document, or things like that. There was a case recently where data from breathalyzer sensors was altered after it had been entered into a database so that people were wrongly convicted of DUI, for example. And so they had to actually throw out a whole bunch of cases in the UK fairly recently. And all of this stuff is happening to the point where US intelligence agencies are saying that the next wave of cyber threat isn't just theft of data, but manipulation of data. You can imagine what would happen if you came in and changed a self-driving car's software or things like that. In fact, Gartner says that they believe that over 50% of organizations will have suffered damage that's caused by either fraudulent software or altered data by the end of next year. And the worst part is a lot of these organizations will have suffered this damage without even realizing it. They will be going along happily making decisions and kicking off processes and doing other things based on data that they believe to be true that is not. So this is really where a variety of systems have come out to try to ensure that your data is safe to use. And this includes everything from worm systems, which are good if you're just archiving things and you never really need to see them again. So things like Amazon, Glacier, and things like that are being used. Obviously, people are trying to put policy controls in place, so the less people that you have that can do anything to your data, the better. Unfortunately, this also doesn't help if you're talking about the fact that a lot of data manipulation and data changing is an inside job, and sometimes it just happens accidentally. Somebody overwrites something and doesn't even realize that they've done it. And one of the things that people have really started to talk about a lot, if you want to talk about making data immutable, is blockchain. And blockchain is certainly part of the solution, but not in the way that a lot of people are talking about it today. So today, you hear more and more people saying, I want to put all of my data on the blockchain, that will make it immutable. And the problem with this is that blockchain technology wasn't designed as a general purpose database or a general purpose file system. It was designed to move very tiny amounts of tokens back and forth among mutually distrustful parties where everyone can see everything. So you can start to immediately see some challenges with this, which is A, you don't necessarily want everyone to see all of your data. B, you're moving around large pieces of data, and so the system doesn't become scalable at that point, and so forth. So this is one of the reasons why Deloitte, for example, has recommended that if you want to assure data integrity, you don't necessarily want to store all of your data on a blockchain. Instead, keep your data where it is, whether that's your supply chain system, your AWS file system, your databases, and so forth, and store a hash of that data onto one or more blockchains. And so this is a way of really ensuring that your data has remained unaltered. Because when you're talking about a hash of data, if you take a document or a piece of data, it has a unique fingerprint or hash. And if even one thing changes, like you change one word in that document, you change the format of that document from a Word document to a PDF or whatever, its hash will not match with the original hash of the document. So putting hashes on chains in general means that you would take your document or your event or your transaction, you create a hash or fingerprint of that. There's 8 billion different ways that you can do that. There's lots of different tools out there that you can do that with. And then you would anchor that hash into one or more blockchains. And what this does is two things. Once you've parked it into, say, a public blockchain, that hash is then immutable, which then means that if you store that then resulting, yes, Ethereum will give you back, or Bitcoin will give you back a transaction ID for that piece. You can then at any later date take a document, hash it, and compare it against that hash that was originally entered into the blockchain at a specific date. So this becomes very important because, for example, if you're looking at surveillance video from a certain point in time, if you hash that video, store that hash into the blockchain, and then later on you have that video and you want to know, has this video been tampered with, you can then ask the blockchain, is there a hash in you that matches the hash of this thing that I'm looking at, and what is the timestamp of that hash? So it can say, yes, this exactly matches something that was put into the system on January 27th, 2018, or no, we don't have the hash at all, or yes, we have the hash, but it was put into the blockchain 3 months later, which means that might be speculatively in error. Are there any sort of questions about how the general process works? So once you've decided that this is a good way to go about it, then there are 3 approaches to doing this. The first one is for you to directly program to Bitcoin or Ethereum to store a hash of data directly onto this public blockchain. There are obviously a few issues when you're trying to do this. The first one is that each blockchain requires that you do this in a different way. So if you are trying to automate the process, you need to either upload it. Bitcoin, for example, has a way of doing this, or you need your system to be programmed in a specific way, like Solidity or whatever, to be able to talk to Ethereum. Secondly, this means you actually need to maintain a wallet. And for most enterprise organizations, this is hugely risky in a variety of different ways. 1, you have to open a wallet. 2, you have to make sure nobody steals your wallet. 3, you have to make sure you don't ever lose your keys or your password for your wallet, because there is no super admin that can come in and say, oh, I forgot my password to my wallet, here's your wallet back. You've just kind of lost it forever. And 4th, you have to absorb all the risk of currency fluctuation. So enterprises, especially when they're talking about large numbers of transactions, have a huge issue with relying on a currency remaining stable that is as unstable as a Bitcoin or Ethereum. This business process might cost you $3 today, and then it might cost you $300 tomorrow, and so forth. Secondly, it can become very expensive as well. So the cost of even inserting one hash into a blockchain can be astronomically expensive to do if you're just putting them in directly yourself. The second approach is to store a hash of data directly on a private blockchain. One of the challenges of this is that private blockchains consist of nodes that are, in the worst case, all run by one company, or in the second case, are run by a very small consortium of companies working together. And when you have only, say, an average of 8 to 12 nodes, of all known participants who have some business relationship with one another, you can actually go through and rewind a blockchain and rewrite it. So if you're trying to do it for the purposes of data integrity, private blockchains are not immutable and can be changed and are not as good for really doing that. Secondly, it can often cost a lot of money for you to set up a blockchain. And thirdly, these things are not interoperable, so anyone that wants to then go through and validate their hash has to actually access your private blockchain directly. It's not just a publicly available thing that anybody can go to and validate hashes openly. So this leads to the third approach, which is to use a data anchoring service or software package in order to anchor data into the blockchain. So in a case, for example, like Cryptowerk service, what we've done is we've actually abstracted away and added some middleware into the process where your application talks directly to our APIs in whatever language you're used to, so Java or Go or Python. And then we then bundle together the hashes that you send us and send those into a variety of different public and private blockchains, whatever you need us to do. So this does a couple of different things. Number one, this allows you to talk to these blockchains without needing to program directly to them. We manage all of the wallets and things like that, so you don't have to worry about currency fluctuations. You just pay us in dollars or euros, or in our case, fractions of a penny for transactions. Because we have a patent pending bundling algorithm, it also allows us to do it much more cheaply, so you won't be paying as much as you would be paying if you did it directly. And then if any of these blockchains, if there's new technologies like Hashgraph or something, it's very easy for you to then switch within the system, hey, instead of writing into Bitcoin and Ethereum, I now want to add Hashgraph, or I now want to add multi-chain, or I want to drop Bitcoin because nobody wants to use Bitcoin anymore, that sort of thing. And it's all transparent and in the background. So basically, the system works the same way. You take your documents, events, or transactions, you create the hashes, you then send us the hashes, and we bundle them together using this special compression algorithm, which I know sounds awfully Silicon Valley-like, but trust us, it works. Then we store that super hash into blockchains, create and return seals that you can then store on your end. And then when somebody comes through and wants to validate it, most importantly, you can validate it through our API if you want, or your customer can actually go directly to the public blockchains that the hash has been entered into and validate it directly. So we're not even in the process for validation if you don't want us to be, which means that your seals will be available, as long as these blockchains are still around. One of the reasons that we write into multiple blockchains is the inevitable question, well, what happens if Bitcoin suddenly goes away, or Ethereum suddenly goes away, or this suddenly goes away? So it helps provide that added level of insurance that because you're using multiple blockchains, you don't have that issue. So obviously the benefits of using a solution like Cryptowerk, and there are a few others out there, but they don't have as many features, I don't think, as ours does, is that we do support a variety of blockchains and distributed ledger technologies, and as new technologies emerge, we can log into those without you having to learn anything new. So this makes it very future-proof. It reduces future vendor reliance. So even if Cryptowerk doesn't exist anymore, I hope we do, but even if Cryptowerk doesn't exist anymore, you can still validate those hashes. Your customers can still validate their hashes up to 10, 15 years in the future, as long as those blockchains are still around. Proof can be secured even if your partner doesn't have your blockchain in-house. So when you hand them that transaction record, they can then go to any number of block explorers for Ethereum or whatever that are publicly available, and they can independently verify the truth of that document without you, without us, really just relying on the math. It's a complete API service, so as you saw, you don't really have to do a whole lot of setting up of anything like wallets or anything else like that. We have sample code for all the different languages. We handle all the transaction fees. And because we only anchor hashes and blockchains, we never see your data. So if you're looking at using, say, a private blockchain solution or some other solutions, you have to actually hand them your data to notarize. We don't need to see the data at all. You just keep that on your end. We can do this at over 1 million hashes a second, and we're SAP certified, so we are stable and have some certain SLAs and things like that that you can really rely on. So your questions are probably around, okay, but how does this apply to me? How does this apply to my particular business? Really, wherever you have data, it's my belief that you should be sealing it or anchoring it so that you can prove that value later. It's really inexpensive. I think it's worth it as an insurance policy. Whether you're using Cryptowerk or some other solution to do it, if you're not doing something to make sure that your data is still reliable, then I think you're kind of dropping the ball on your data. This applies to everything from data marketplaces to utilities, retail, pharmaceuticals, aerospace and defense, software distribution, automotive supply chain, any matter of environmental data, that sort of thing as well. So Bipronum will talk a little bit more about one application of this, but some other applications that we're seeing are, for example, in the pharmaceutical space, where there is a new thing called the DSCSA, where your drugs have to be tracked from the time they're manufactured until the time they are dispensed. You have to track where they've gone. You have to track things like whether they've been rerouted or not. You know, box accidentally falls off the truck. They also have to be tracked in some cases, like cold chain, that they were always kept at a specific temperature, because if they're not, then those drugs no longer will work in the way that you intend them to work. So one of our clients is actually using us. They've attached sensors to each of these vials and boxes and things like that, and these sensors both track the GPS location as well as track the temperature. And that information goes into their overall supply chain system, but at the same time that information is generated, it's hashed and put into the blockchain, so that at a later date, the FDA or other regulators, a hospital or whatever, can call up where has this drug traveled through, what has been the temperature it's been kept at, and can hit a button that just says, has this data been validated, and we can tell you, yes, it has been. The second case is in sealing data streams. So you can see where this would be applicable to surveillance video, to autonomous vehicle data. So for example, Tesla was recently involved in a case where the transportation agency requested data from their car, from their self-driving car. And one of the very first things that agency asked is, well, it's nice you've given us this data. You've given it to us. How can we trust that you're giving us accurate data? And so if they're using a solution like Cryptowerk or anchoring hashes in the blockchain, they would be able to hand over the data and the seals to be able to say, you can go validate this yourself. We're telling the truth. You can also use it for transactive energy or building energy records, where you're trying to make sure that energy being generated from a particular power plant hasn't been altered by the energy producer to say that they produced more data than they said they did, and so forth. Obviously, another big case for when you think about data notarization, which is in effect what this is the next generation of, is sealing documents and records like that, so tax records. For example, there's a requirement in Germany that tax records have to be kept for 10 years, and you have to prove that you didn't alter those tax records. So, 10 years after your retail transaction, the government can request those records. You can hand them the records along with the notarization so that they know that they haven't been tampered with. Emails, obviously, M&A data rooms, legal records, all sorts of things like that. Another area is in sealing software and firmware code. So for example, if you go out on the internet and you search for WinZip, the second Google result for copy of WinZip turns out to not be really WinZip. It is another software package that's put together by someone else. By sealing not only the actual code in the blockchain, but also the identity of who generated the code, you can then, when you get to, say, a site that says download WinZip, you could hit a button that says verify, and you could verify not only the content of that as being authentic, but you can also verify it was created by the actual person that you think created it. And that's guaranteed through PKI and some other ways as well. So you can see where authenticating your data can be really important. You should be digitally sealing your documents and data in the blockchain. These digital fingerprints have verifiable proof of identity and allow third parties to identify that. Are there any questions before we kind of move on? I'm interested in hearing a little bit more about you guys and whether you see any applicability.
Yeah, I have a little question about the architecture. So, for example, if I'm the user of your service, so I get a seal in addition to this hash. So, in some God forbidden case that Cryptowerk is not available, can I or somebody else verify directly on the chain?
Yes. So basically, you keep your documents, you keep the hashes of your documents as we do it, and then when we give you back the seal and transaction ID, it actually contains within that record, here's the ID of the Ethereum transaction, here's the ID of the Bitcoin transaction. You can then go directly to any Bitcoin or Ethereum Explorer, give it that hash and give it that transaction ID and validate it directly without using Cryptowerk at all.
But you said also this bundler. If your transaction is bundled with some other company's transaction, how can I?
So we actually have a system, and there's instructions on our website if you sign up for our free trial of how to sort of decouple that. So we send you back a little identifier that allows you to locate your hash within those hashes.
Okay. So you can be independently verified?
Yes, they can 100% be independently verified. And yeah, I'm happy to follow up with you and get you instructions on how to do that as well. Yes.
I have a question about the enterprise adoption side. You know, it sounds like there's a lot of use cases and applications of this. As you approach kind of a global enterprise that, you know, has that knee jerk of, we need to do something on the blockchain, you know, how are you going to try and identify what you think are kind of the most relevant use cases and the places that have the most velocity behind them?
So the interesting thing is that we've seen our market shift a little bit from the I need to do something on the blockchain to I want to make sure that my data is verifiable. And in that case, your biggest customers, prospects, are the ones where data is the most valuable. Either in cases where they are selling data, so that data has intrinsic value, and you obviously want to be able to prove that that data is good, or in areas that are highly regulated, like energy, government, pharmaceuticals, that sort of space as well.
Makes sense.
Privacy, where privacy is at a premium.
Yeah,
Like that.
yeah, that's also really important. Yes?
Okay, when I sell my data,
Uh-huh,
and then I see it somewhere else, where I haven't sold it, and I suspect I can verify that the data came from me with the seal, correct?
yes, that is
Is that
correct.
a common use case at all?
So it's a use case that we're exploring. In some cases, the challenge with that is that when data changes form, it also changes its hash. So for example, if I take a picture and I then post it on Facebook,
Yeah.
and I don't use the full resolution of the picture, the hash of that picture on Facebook will not match the hash of the original photo that I have. So in some ways, it depends on the type of data that you have.
Have you considered embedding kind of a
Watermark.
secret mark that's hashed within that data?
Yeah.
That can't be detected in normal ways?
So-
Go ahead.
Yeah, so we are doing some interesting things along those lines that I can't talk about
Okay.
here. But we would love to follow up with you and talk a little bit more about it, you know, once we have an
Yeah,
NDA
we'd
and that
like
sort of
that.
thing.
I think on the media, it would be like embedding a watermark or a
Yeah, I'm
watermark
getting a
or-
watermark that has the seal. The seal's unknown
Mhm.
until you've discovered someone's using your data.
When you could run the watermark through
But we shouldn't talk about it anymore,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. As the product person, I'm like, oh, I have the secret.
No, but a lot of that is in the public domain.
Yes.
Yeah.
No, I know.
And,
Yeah.
and private.
No, we used to do
Yeah,
that
they're all
the
awesome.
old-fashioned way.
Yeah. So we have what we think is a unique approach to the problem, but we'll find out as we talk as well. So I'm going to turn it over now to Tim and let him talk a little bit about Bipronum and how they're doing it. Do you want to switch seats with me or
Stand up.
stand up? All right.
Firstly, thank you all for Cryptowerk and for all of you for having me here, Bipronum. I'm coming at it not from the technical side so much, but I know it's a technical audience. I'll do my very best and to reflect some of that. I just, of course, listening to Catherine as well, I'm just fascinated by what's going on and that we have the videos where politicians could be saying something, but then they are so good at altering it that we couldn't tell by human, you know, whatever perception. And then this whole need of like blockchain or data integrity that we could have, and maybe taking the complete cost out of everything. And how easy it is with companies like Cryptowerk is fascinating to me. And there's so much that we as in business, but everywhere as human beings, we exchange so much data, and now it can be so alterable as it's never been before. I'm just fascinated that, you know, how much we need this and how easy, on the other hand, it's become maybe to be able to put something on the blockchain. So it's a very interesting partnership for us as we go in. We come from a different angle. My background is in enterprise software, and in some ways, and I will start there as well. We want to do something very different at Bipronum, which is something bottom up. But going back to where software has come from, it's usually been something very much top down. It's usually been something where developers have written a big monolithic block of something. It's gone through product management and coding and all kinds of things. There's releases, and then the people that use that are the wheels in there. They are the users, but they have very little influence as to what that actually, you know, how that works. So they often don't even know everything that's going on. They are sort of at the end point, just one little wheel in that huge machine. And if we think of, let's say, what has a Salesforce done, and software as a service, it's put everything on a cloud. It doesn't mean that for the individual, it's really become more of something that they can actually own. when we started this company, it was really something about, we want people power automation. We want to have people be in a place that they can really come up and push this forward, and they can figure it out on their own terms. And so that's the big driving force. That's for me coming from enterprise software, where there's also always that dissatisfaction with all of that. And now, why can't we do something like in the consumer approach? So the whole topic is a little bit consumerization of enterprise. You may have heard of that. Here the lady, for instance, is a partner manager, and I'm not going to read through a lot of these things, but everyone has a lot of things that they want to achieve, and especially when that goes across companies. It's not like in one company, it's not like a static thing that I do every day and it's the same. But business is not static. It's with different people, it's different timelines all the time. There's nothing really to support people like that, and we get back to email and texting, and that really doesn't do much for us. So that's the overall topic. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but incredible amount of time is wasted. We talked a little already about legal, and I'll focus on that field. If you're thinking about legal and what lawyers do, they are the logistics experts. They know that here's the document, it has to be signed by these people in this order, in this time frame. They set up board meetings, and certain things have to happen in a certain amount of time. A third of that time is just pushing things up the hill. It's just making sure that people execute certain things in a certain time frame. It's not really what the intelligence is all about. It's really just about something, well, here's the email. And we were talking about blockchain. So for legal people, the system of record today is email and attachments. And if they want to prove to each other that that was actually communicated at that point of time, they go back to a long list of emails and to find out, well, what did this person actually commit to at that time. There's new tools like DocuSign that have come in and have helped. But essentially, for many of the interactions, it still is email, which is a totally archaic system if you think about it. So there's much more that we can do about it. So where Bipronum comes in is to really say, let's take a sort of gamified approach to all of this. What if we had 11 building blocks? I don't know if anyone's played Minecraft or their kids have played Minecraft, but Minecraft is a game that you can build, hills, you can build water, you can build houses, you can do all kinds of stuff. What we have done is we've basically taken all the kind of interactions that you have with business people and taken 11 building blocks. We call them motions. And these motions represent things like, well, let's come up with a draft. Let's come up and review something. Let's come up and sign something, inform. But there's always a success journey. So in contrast to, let's say, email, what you're doing is you have a timeline. So you're driving towards a goal. Email doesn't have that. Chat doesn't have that. Most tools don't have that. So in that sense, all of these motions have their own timeline, and they have certain people that are involved at certain stages. And you don't have these long feeds of things. What you see is just, here's, these motions, and it's not on the level of the work. The work gets done and people can do the work whenever they want, but it's on the level of just that success. But that's really what we bring in. And when I say gamified, and I'll also, that's what it looks like, I'll skip that while we're here also today. But imagine that now you're in legal and you're working with a partner, and it's a little like a game. You're saying, normally an NDA takes 6 weeks for us. Now you may have never done an NDA between two big companies, like 6 weeks, that's crazy. But if there's two big companies involved, it'll easily take that, because you've got the business people, you've got the legal people internally, then they negotiate, and all kinds of things can come up, right? So the mission now is, let's do it in 3 weeks. Let's do it in 2 weeks. What would that mean? How would I recombine maybe these pieces, bring in different people, different texts and things like that, templates, so that we can all be much faster? This is the whole notion of what's bottom up. It's the people figuring out on the fly what they need to be doing, but it's still in a structure that provides automation to really get there. So I hope I haven't lost most of you. I don't want to, demo would show this much more of how that actually works, but these are the sort of success journeys that you have. You can see motions that are already completed. You can see the people involved. All of these, have certain racy roles, if people are familiar with that. but I won't go into detail. There's certain work items that people are working on. There's a description of what needs to get done here, and people can add comments. There's no long list of comments somewhere where you have to find out how did this apply to this overall thing that we're doing. All the comments are sorted by motions, and so you can always go back. The other thing, of course, is you can always go back as to, well, you know, if some of these are completed, well, you know, what did they actually look like? Who said what? Who was involved in what way? And this gets us now to where we want to be with where the blockchain really comes in. If you think of something like, you know, here something was signed and a DocuSign did that, but wasn't that part of a much broader, longer interaction that I, let's say, had with somebody around an NDA, right? Okay, the NDA was signed, but when did we start? What was the first version of the document like? Who was involved? Who actually, you know, internally maybe looked over this and reviewed it and said that this is fine and ready to go, right? All of that normally gets lost because it's what you're storing right now is only the DocuSign thing. And so what we really get with blockchain and with working with Cryptowerk, just imagine, is the whole transaction, the whole success journey happens, and at each step of the way, so let's say this was drafting the document, and at that point here, we write to the blockchain, these are the work items, exactly the point, we get the hash, and then also what people were involved and what did they declare. They maybe said, I was the author, but I did my, whatever I had to do and all of these things. So at each time one of these motions now is successful, we write something to the blockchain. And that is something, again, compared to DocuSign, it gives us the whole transaction, and it puts everything now somewhere where it's truly, and that's why we call it trustless transaction, truly safe. So this is a little bit more the technical part of it, but basically walk through that and how that works, and so I don't want to go through that again. Basically, Catherine explained, you know, how all of this works, the hash works and everything. The people verification, there's also trusted third parties that can do that. That's another option for us. But we are focused here upon how easy it has become to do this. How easy it has become across the whole success journey to always be looking at what were the work items like here, 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 and here. Who said what, who was involved in the overall. So, whole context, I've talked about that from beginning to end. Just compare to what you have today, right? Today you have none of that. Decentral, anytime, anyone verification. I mean, this goes across like legal boundaries. It could be, if you wanted to do a transaction in a global context and you wanted to have this kind of immutability, how would you do that nowadays, right? How can you really prove that? Well, here's an easy way of doing that. It's truly decentral. So that's there. So we've seen how this works. We've seen some of these benefits. I want to get back to the initial thing that this is something that is for people to do on their own terms. They love tracking their own success. This is, if you like, I'm not going to go into detail, but if like a Fitbit, people could see, you know, how they're doing. How many NDAs did I do? How many approvals did I do? So last week I did this amount of actions. This, you know, last week, this week I'm doing well. I could set my own KPIs. I could say, you know, I want to contribute this much to the overall. So that's what we do as Bipronum. We're taking all of this kind of work into something as like consumery as if it was a Fitbit. I can see how I'm doing. But it's global empowerment. And now it's also surfacing blockchain to everyone. So what if I could see, well, how many of my motions, my business motions, were enabled by blockchain? Wouldn't that be great? It really brings blockchain out for everyone to see. It's not something that's in the back office and that's kind of security I don't understand. It really tells me, yeah, you use blockchain to good effect, right? You made, you know, all of these transactions, and then maybe I can compare that to all the if I have 100 transactions and now 50 of those have been secured by the blockchain, that's a pretty good rate. And then the company might also look on that and say, you know, that's a pretty good security that you've achieved, and maybe you get an award for that because, hey, you know, you're the security champion. So just the sense of bringing that into the front end is very much for us, what this could also be about is, you know, making blockchain real. So with that, just a little bit on the pricing, I've alluded to that, but for us, we're looking at, you know, $5 a month per person. Compare that with the $25 that a DocuSign charges, right? So if we're saying we're taking the cost out, is dramatically taking the cost out of what we're doing. And then saying that we're not just doing the signing part of it, we're doing the whole transaction. So maybe we have 5 times more. Just think of how legal capture or doing their work, and it's email. So that's like a 25x factor of how we're improving on the counter. This makes it so much more flexible, it's embedded into their work, and they can actually change it around. That makes it elastic, and it's actually much more data integrity than they ever had before. So I think that's what I wanted to say. This is kind of where we are as a company, but maybe we can leave it there, and wanted to, you know, invite your comments and questions, please.
Often it's